Hello, welcome to another episode to discuss economics with Dr. Rajapathirana. Today we are going to discuss about the role of the central bank. And again, we have Dr. Rajapathirana, who had in fact worked at the central bank, not only at the central bank, at the World Bank and the central bank in many other countries. Dr. Rajapathirana, welcome and thank you very much for joining with us again today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy this discussion. Yeah.
Dr. Rajapathirana, actually, what's the last time we discussed about the central? We discussed about the inflation.
Inflation, yeah.
And you mentioned, and what we discussed was it's always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon.
Yeah.
From the little I know, the money supply basically is done through the central bank.
Yeah.
So actually, what's the role of the central bank? And also, I would like you to connect it also with inflation.
Yeah.
Is there a role or isn't there a role?
There's a role. It's their main role, actually. And there's a role in the sense that if you, as you say, there are problems when the inflation were to start, the central bank should make sure, and it is in charge of running monetary policy. Monetary policy should make sure that there's no runaway or high inflation in the country, because that really distorts everything and upsets, can't do business, you can't anticipate things when there's no way of dealing with price increases, which is another way of calling inflation. So the central bank has at the apex of the financial system in this country or in any other country. One of the most important thing it can do is to keep the economy from having high inflation. So that is their number one thing. So if there high inflation, then we can look at it. Then, hey, what happened? What were you not doing? As a result, why prices went up and there was inflation.
So if there's, what you mean is if there's inflation, the first person to point finger is none other than it's the central bank.
Central bank. So why? Of course, central banks are now everybody realized that central bank should be neutral. Central bank should be neutral in the sense that it doesn't favor one government and gives them more money and deny it to the next government. It has been completely neutral. outside the political system, and that works. Actually, there are a lot of very important research done in the late 1980s that is basically showing the more free the central bank from relationship with the government, lower is the inflation rate. So if you want to have a low inflation rate, make sure that there's no interference with the central bank. So increase the freedom of the central bank. There may be a better word that I think I have freedom.
Is it the independence of the central bank?
Independence of the central bank is to ensure we have it now. We didn't always have it. In the last period, there are a lot of interference with the central bank. When I was working there, 1965 to 75, thing was a very quiet place. Nobody raised questions about the central bank. Okay. Why? Because they followed the rules. We based our rules based on the man who created the system in Sri Lanka. And so we follow the monetary rules. And so therefore there's no reason to worry. Inflation was 3 to 4% per whole period chunks of time. It started going up in 1980s when we started Mahavali and a lot of expenditure took place. And I'm not saying that we should not have done Mahavali. I'm saying that everything was thrust at the same place and inflation began to rise from about 2-3% to go up 8%. At that time, 8% inflation was very high. Now people accept it as a, so it was a very quiet period for inflation. Yeah.
Dr. Rajapathirana, so you mentioned if for inflation, central bank is directly responsible. Is there anything else other than the inflation that the central bank is responsible?
Oh yes, it is a number of things. First of all, it is the advisor to the government.
Okay. Yeah. Is it advisor to the government?
It's advisor to the government. During that period, I'm referring to the earlier period, when there's inflation being threatened, the central bank is obliged to give then to the Minister of Finance that there's inflation is going to be, say, 10%, and how to prevent it from increasing.
Right.
To keep it in that rate. So there's a very important role, advisor to the government.
Okay.
And also lender of last resort to the commercial and financial system in the country, because if you have too much money, there's a problem. If you have too little money, also there's a problem. So therefore, it has to keep the economy on what's called even keel, and therefore central bank has a very important role to play. Yeah.
Understood.
Yeah.
I think there was some conversation that it is also economic growth is also a responsibility of the central bank, and some of the new central banks are supporting the economic growth to the government. Is there any truth in that, and what are the pros and cons if that route was taken?
No, I really don't agree with that, because central bank's role is well defined. It cannot promote growth. Growth is you have to get factors of production. If you talk about growth, you are talking about factors of production and its deployment and its private public sector and all those things. It has nothing to do with the central bank. Central bank can help by maintaining price stability.
Right.
The best help the central can do is to keep economy on an even scale, and the monetary policy cannot promote economic growth.
Okay.
But it can prevent from bad things from happening to the economy by maintaining steady rate of inflation or rate of increase in prices. I won't say inflation, rate of increase in prices. Yeah.
Excellent. So just to understand, the best help that the central bank could do for economic growth is only to maintain the price stability, and the rest will take place, because economic growth is more a function of the factor market's productivity,
Yeah.
rather than the growth of the money supply.
Yeah.
So the central bank has to keep the price levels stable, so then the factor market productivity can take place, because if the central bank starts intervening on economic growth, that probably will end up in another disastrous situation. Now,
actually,
yes,
we have had that.
We have had that.
We have had that situation, maybe say 7, 8 years ago or 10 years ago, when people did not follow monetary rules in the central bank, when there were questionable appointments, people who had not background in it. And so we made a transition, and I think we are okay now. And look, we can give the evidence, reduce inflation rate. We did it in a way that didn't hurt anybody. It was very, very well, nicely done.
Absolutely. Dr. Rajapathirana, since you have worked with many other central bankers and central banks, let's say India, Thailand, you have worked in Latin America, Africa, wherever, is there any examples that you have found that the central bank is supporting economic growth, or are they going beyond the main roles that you have mentioned, the price stability and as the lender of last resort, or advising the government?
Yeah.
Actually, are they going, and what are the pros and cons if they have tried that method?
Actually, as economists, we know that central bank cannot promote growth.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not in their terms of reference.
Right.
Okay? Their terms of reference is to remove barriers and allow the markets to behave the way that it should. And central bank's main point there is to keep the price level steady, so that we can anticipate businesses can take place, consumers can know how much it's going to cost their next meal. So that is the best thing it can do. Or it can say, if there is here, if the central bank sees, for example, some part of the monetary is behaving badly, then he can say, you can't do that. For example, if they offer very high interest rates in order to attract things that they cannot meet the demand when such a demand arises, then it can prevent things from happening. It is more to prevent rather than promote. And the good countries that have grown fast, actually countries can't go fast without having a steady price stability.
Understood. So now I think after your era of working at the central bank, recently we saw a conversation of a new central bank act.
Yeah.
Providing our central bank independence. What are your views on it? Is it a good thing?
I think it's a very good thing. I think we should have done it some time ago. and we got the right people in place to reform it in such a way. I think it has done maybe three important things. First of all, the independence of the central bank, which is very important thing, because a lot of research has been done on other countries that if you less interference of the government in the central bank, the lower is the inflation rate in those countries. That is not arguable anyway, because there is enough empirical evidence to show it, done by very good people also. But this is a new central bank act changes to give more credit, more independence to central bank. Now, not everybody wants that way, I must say. But I believe that that's the important thing to have. And so that if you separate the two parts, but the monetary part and the thing, then you can get better results than if the government is trying to interfere with the system. Second thing is as advisor to the government. Yeah. There used to be, when I was working there, every year you had to write a new thing about monetary policy. And I was then at that time in charge of that part of it. And after you've done it, you can't look at it in the sense that next year I can't say, I want to see my daughter. No, they won't. It's very carefully protected what the central bank was doing. And the central bank, therefore, also informed the Minister of Finance in advance our situation is not going to be very good if we continue this way, and therefore provides the advice. And even before they ask, we provide the advice, this is what we should do. So I think we have gone past that. These reforms that were undertaken also isolate the two things, that central bank's internal control of the internal, what I would say, but it does to make the institution more robust and strong on the one hand, and then to separate it from other things that it is not trying to regulate the system. Now, I recently read what is in I won't say from where, saying that central bank determines the exchange rate. Oh, wow.
Right.
It is in one of the famous, no, it doesn't. It cannot, it should be a disaster. So I think that a sober, rule-based system like what we are having, we continue to have to, especially to grow the country. So then private sector can anticipate what's going to happen to prices, and consumers can have, same people building houses will know cement price cannot go beyond this much, because that has been established record for it. So stability is a very important requirement to grow. Actually now, one of the things we are doing, what we have done, you also they are part of it, is to make sure that the economy is stable.
Dr. Rajapathirana, a quick question. Now, you said earlier when you worked at the central bank, in your era, it was a very quiet place.
Yeah.
No one really, discussed, it was not on media every day, news stories about central bank. But this new Central Bank Independence Act came very recently.
Yeah.
So what was the reason, like at your time, without this new Independence Central Bank Act, things were better, but now,
I mean,
what
I'm going to say three things, may not be very complimentary to. First of all, they followed the Monetary Law Act.
Okay.
That was a very good, it's done by Exeter. Exeter, who wrote the constitution for the central bank, was invited to come and run it. And actually,
do you mean afterwards that we didn't follow the monetary law?
It went crazy later. I mean, 10 years ago, it doesn't follow the rules. Because if you follow the rules, then we wouldn't be in this type of situation that we had. You couldn't have very high inflation. So that was it. When I say quiet, as a good quiet, people work very well. Everybody and also then second point is that appointment of the governor was done in a very good people who became governor, and they had some experience. They were the governor that I worked for was Governor Herbert Tennecoon. Excellent man, excellent person. He ran it so well, you didn't realize anybody was running it. You see what I mean? He was very open. He would call you once a week or something and ask, so Sarath, what do you think is happening in that country or this country? what is the economy? So do you agree with it? And can we talk about, it's very much involved.
So you basically mentioned it. We, at that point we followed the Monetary Law Act, and afterwards we really didn't follow. But do you believe that the new provisions brought in through the Independence the Central Bank Act can fix the problems of not following the Monetary Law Act in the recent history?
I am happy with the reforms because it corrects a lot of problems that are in the system. Okay, but if we can't say what will happen. If they follow the rules, we'll be okay.
We will be okay.
Yeah.
Understood. My final question, Dr. Rajapathirana. So, there's always, there's another conversation that regardless of our attempts to make the central banks independent, it is becoming a challenging task because somehow always the politicians try to, poke their fingers into it, not only in Sri Lanka, even in other parts of the world. And then there were multiple other conversations have arisen, okay, on some on dollarization, some on currency boards. Can you explain on those aspects? What is dollarization? Why some countries completely move to dollarization? Is it a viable option for a country like us? And what is a currency board? And is it a viable option for us? If not, why is it is not?
Yeah. Dollarization takes place when you don't have any faith in your currency. Then you have to ask the question, why is it that you don't have the faith? Okay? Then you have the answer there because they are printing money. When I say printing money, borrowing from the central bank. Yeah. It's not going to the having a physical machine to do it. That's one. Second thing is that people leave the currency board. People ask for currency board because they found there's a better result during that time with the currency board because again it didn't have Monetary Law Act, but in the currency board it was completely, there was no central bank. Everything monetary thing was automatically done by the currency board. So currency board could not influence exchange rate, interest rate or anything like that. It had to go with the flow. And the system looked after itself to a large extent. But later when it turns out that real prices could not fall below, not downward flexible, then you can run a currency board. So people who talk about currency boards don't understand that part of the story. It requires so many things for it to work well. First of all, you have to have great downward flexibility and up flexibility of prices, which is given, which you cannot go and change. It's there. So without that, I have talked with a lot of people who are in Washington, crazy about going back to it. Then we discovered we can't. We actually look at number of cases and see, no, we can't support it. It doesn't work that way. It may have helped certain countries, small islands, for example. No, really, it worked there because there is no complicated system. But if you if your trade unions are clamoring to get a price increase, wage increase, then currency board won't help you.
Just a final quick questions. My previous questions were supposed to be the last question, but this is my final question. Since you have worked in Latin America, you mentioned their inflation in our previous conversation.
Incredible.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, is there loopholes in their central banks as well, Dr. Rajapathirana? Because if the central bank is if it's their main responsibility on the money supply, if the Latin American countries are going through this, inflation,
the most famous case of countries I like very much, Argentina, right? Very capable people, very smart people. Most of them educated Chicago and Harvard and places like that. This government interfered throughout all the time. And I have my colleagues who I studied together with. They are also from central bank like me, and we compared notes. You say, my God, you all have a good system. We have been doing this for years, going on one after another. Inflation goes up by 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% in Argentina. And people are ready for it. I mean, in the sense that they know this is coming.
Do you still follow what's happening in Argentina? Because there's a new president and there's some conversation about some reforms that is happening in Argentina. Do you still follow the
Yeah, I
reforms?
follow because these are I worked for 10 years
10
in Latin America. Most of them were my friends, and we worked with very nice people, very well educated.
Any final thoughts on what's happening at the moment on Argentina, Dr. Rajapathirana?
I haven't looked at it in the last
Last few
few weeks, so I don't know. But I know that they have a huge challenge there because they have a bad sort of a history that they might replay it. We don't know. I don't know the new man. There's a very good man at one stage that I knew, but he left and he said, I can't do this. There's too much interference. They're giving me orders to do that. And he said, I'm going. And he left. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rajapathirana. Thank you very much. Today we discussed about the role of the central bank. I think we covered quite a lot. And we are looking forward to see you with another episode with Economics with Dr. Sarath Rajapathirana. Thank you very much.